Cena walked into his own company and was told to wait in the hallway like a delivery man. The executives inside were laughing, drinking whiskey, completely unaware that the man in the plain gray T-shirt owned 53% of everything around them. They looked at his athletic shorts and old running shoes and decided he was nobody worth acknowledging. 7 minutes later, John stepped into that boardroom. He did not come to talk. He came to fire every single one of them. But what he discovered next was far worse than disrespect. They were not just arrogant. They were planning to destroy everything he had built. What most people did not know about John Cena was that beyond his wrestling and acting career, he had quietly built something significant. 6 years ago, he had co-founded Titan Peak Productions, an independent film company in Los Angeles dedicated to telling meaningful stories. He owned 53% of the company, making him the majority shareholder. But unlike most investors who demanded constant attention, John had chosen to remain in the shadows. In all official documents, he was listed simply as J. Cena. Most employees had never met him or even seen his face in connection with the company. For 6 years, John had stepped back from daily operations, dedicating his time to charitable causes around the world. He had granted over 650 wishes for children through the Make-A-Wish Foundation. He had trusted his executives to maintain the values he had built into Titan Peak Productions. He communicated through emails and occasional video calls, always with his camera off, preferring to listen rather than be seen. Perhaps that had been his mistake. On this particular Tuesday morning, John decided to visit the company headquarters without any announcement. He wanted to see how things were truly running, to feel the real pulse of the organization rather than the polished reports that landed in his inbox every quarter. He did not call ahead. He did not arrange for anyone to meet him. He simply showed up the way any owner might check on something they genuinely cared about. The Titan Peak Productions building rose 12 stories into the Los Angeles sky, all glass and steel and modern ambition. The lobby was a cathedral of corporate success with polished marble floors that reflected the morning light and abstract art pieces that cost more than most people earned in a year. Everything about the space was designed to impress, to intimidate, to remind visitors that they were entering a place of power and importance. John walked through the gleaming entrance dressed exactly as he always was in his private life, a plain gray shirt that fit comfortably rather than fashionably, athletic shorts that had seen countless gym sessions, simple running shoes that had logged thousands of miles, a faded baseball cap pulled low over his shaved head, partly for anonymity, partly out of habit. Over his shoulder hung an old gym bag, worn at the edges and modest in appearance. Most people would assume it contained nothing but workout clothes. They would be wrong. He looked like someone who might work as a personal trainer or coach youth football on weekends. He looked like a man who spent his mornings at the gym and his afternoons helping neighbors move furniture. He certainly did not look like a man who controlled a major film studio worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And that, of course, was exactly the point. The young receptionist glanced up as he approached the front desk. Her name tag read, Brittany, and she had joined Titan Peak Productions only 4 months ago. Fresh from a communications degree and eager to climb the entertainment industry ladder, she had been trained to handle the constant flow of people who passed through these doors. Agents with their confident smiles, actors with their desperate hope masked as casual interest, directors with their artistic intensity, writers clutching scripts like lottery tickets. She had learned quickly that in this business, everyone believed they were special. Her job was to sort the truly important from the merely hopeful, and she had developed a keen eye for the difference. She looked at the man standing before her. There was something familiar about his face, even partially hidden beneath that baseball cap. That massive frame, that clean-shaven head, those kind eyes. Recognition flickered across her mind like a half-remembered song. John Cena, the wrestler turned actor. She had seen his movies when she was younger. Her brother had been obsessed with WWE, watching every match, memorizing every catchphrase. But that was years ago, was it not? A different era entirely. Her initial spark of interest faded quickly into professional assessment. She saw celebrities regularly. This was a film studio after all. Just last week, she had directed a famous director to the third floor without so much as a flutter in her pulse. She was beyond being starstruck. And besides, she thought, studying him with a cool evaluation she had perfected. When was the last time John Cena had been in anything significant? She could not remember seeing his name attached to any recent blockbuster. No buzz on social media about major projects. No premieres covered by entertainment news. He had faded from the spotlight the way so many performers did once their moment passed. Looking at his plain shirt, his athletic shorts, the gym bag that seemed almost out of place in this temple of polished success, Brittany felt her assumption solidify into certainty. This was not a man at the height of his career. This was someone on the decline, probably here hoping to charm his way into a meeting, maybe secure a small role in one of their upcoming productions. She had seen it before. Former stars who could not accept that their time had ended, wandering into studios with hopeful smiles and outdated headshots. It was sad, really, but it was not her job to be sentimental. She arranged her face into that particular expression of polite dismissal, the one that conveyed helpfulness while communicating clearly that the person before her was not particularly important. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone efficient and cool. "I am here to see the executive team," John said quietly. His voice was soft, unhurried, carrying none of the demanding energy she usually heard from industry people trying to project importance. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, I do not." Brittany almost allowed herself a small laugh. No appointment, dressed like that, expecting to walk in and see the executives. This was exactly the kind of optimistic delusion she encountered every week. "I am sorry," she said, her voice taking on that practiced tone of false sympathy. "But the executive team is in a very important strategic meeting right now. They absolutely cannot be disturbed. These sessions are critical to the company's direction." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Critical direction. Words designed to remind him of his place in the hierarchy of importance. "You are welcome to wait over there," she continued, gesturing vaguely toward a row of simple chairs along the hallway wall. They were positioned away from the main traffic flow, out of sight from the important areas. The kind of seating reserved for delivery people, maintenance workers, and visitors who did not quite belong. "But honestly," she added, lowering her voice as if sharing a helpful secret, "it could be a very long wait. These meetings sometimes go on for hours. You might want to come back another time, or perhaps call ahead to schedule something proper." John looked at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he simply nodded. "I will wait," he said. He walked to the chair she had indicated and sat down, his old gym bag resting on his lap. He did not argue. He did not protest. He did not pull out a business card or drop names or demand to speak with someone in charge. He simply accepted the seat he had been assigned like a man who understood that some lessons could only be learned through observation. Brittany watched him go, then turned back to her computer with a small shake of her head. Just another hopeful who would eventually realize he was wasting his time and leave. She had already forgotten him. Minutes passed. The lobby hummed with the busy energy of a successful enterprise. Well-dressed men and women walked past in purposeful strides, their expensive shoes clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. They carried tablets and phones, and the unmistakable air of people who believed their work truly mattered. None of them glanced at the man in the plain shirt sitting quietly by the wall. A group of young executives hurried past, discussing market projections in loud, confident voices. They did not notice him. A woman in designer heels walked by, speaking rapidly into her phone about a talent negotiation. She did not see him. An older gentleman in a perfectly tailored suit strolled toward the elevator, checking his Rolex. He did not acknowledge the quiet figure in the waiting area. John watched them all. He noted the expensive watches, the designer bags, the carefully cultivated images of success. He remembered when Titan Peak Productions had been different, when he had walked these halls himself in the early days, talking to everyone from the creative directors to the cleaning staff. He had insisted on a culture where ideas mattered more than appearances, where every person was treated with dignity regardless of their title or their wardrobe. What he was seeing now was something else entirely. About 5 minutes into his wait, a young man emerged from a side corridor. His name was Connor Reynolds, and he had recently been promoted to junior executive. It was a modest title in the grand hierarchy, but Connor wore it like a crown bestowed by royalty. His suit was expensive and slightly too tight, chosen for its Italian label rather than its fit. On his wrist gleamed a Rolex that had cost him 3 months of salary, a purchase he considered an essential investment in his professional image. Connor walked with the confident stride of someone who believed the universe was arranging itself for his inevitable success. He was heading to the water cooler when he noticed the man sitting in the waiting area. He recognized the face immediately. Even with the baseball cap and the casual clothes, there was no mistaking that massive frame, that shaved head. John Cena, the wrestler from those old WWE matches that played on cable television late at night. The guy from those mediocre action comedies. But instead of respect or even curiosity, Connor felt only a warm surge of superiority. He had heard the whispers in industry circles. John Cena had gone quiet. No major projects in years, no presence at the important parties, no mentions in the trades. He was yesterday's headline, a name that belonged to a different chapter of entertainment history. And just look at how he was dressed. The Connor's eyes swept over the plain shirt, the athletic shorts, the old gym bag, the baseball cap that looked like it had been purchased at a sporting goods store a decade ago. This was not how successful people presented themselves. This was how people looked when they had given up, when they were desperate, when they had nothing left but hope and a familiar face. Connor smirked to himself. This was probably some washed-up celebrity hoping to leverage past fame into a present opportunity. Maybe he was here to audition for a supporting role, or, worse, to beg for any part at all. How the mighty had fallen. In this business, Connor knew, you were only as good as your last success, and John Cena had not had a success in a very long time. He walked past without acknowledgement. Not a nod, not a polite smile. Not even the basic courtesy one stranger might extend to another. He simply continued to the water cooler, filled his cup, and walked back the same way, his eyes fixed on his phone, deliberately not looking at the waiting visitor. Why would he? People who looked like that did not deserve his attention. John watched him pass. He noted the expensive watch, the self-satisfied stride, the casual arrogance in every movement. He said nothing. His face revealed nothing. But behind those calm eyes, something was being carefully recorded, filed away, understood. From his seat in the hallway, John had a clear view through the glass walls of the main conference room. The architecture of the building had been designed for transparency, for openness, but what John saw through that glass was anything but transparent. Inside sat the men who were supposedly running his company. Bradley Morrison, the chief operating officer, was leaning back in his leather chair with the casual ease of a king surveying his domain. He was in his early 50s, silver hair perfectly styled, suit impeccably tailored by hands that charged thousands for their work. On his wrist was a Patek Philippe watch that cost more than most families earned in 2 years. He was gesturing broadly as he spoke, his hands cutting through the air in expansive movements designed to show off that expensive timepiece as much as to emphasize his points. Next to him sat Derek Sullivan, The chief financial officer, younger than Bradley by perhaps a decade, but equally polished, equally entitled. He was nodding along to whatever Bradley was saying, occasionally adding comments that made both men laugh with the comfortable ease of inside jokes. On the table before Derek sat a crystal glass of whiskey, amber liquid catching the afternoon light. It was barely past noon, but apparently the rules about drinking during business hours did not apply to men at this level. Near the coffee station hovered a third figure, Travis Whitman, the chief of staff, whose primary function seemed to be agreeing enthusiastically with everything Bradley and Derek said. He laughed at their jokes half a beat too late. He nodded with excessive energy. He refilled their cups with the attentiveness of a servant rather than a colleague. The perfect portrait of a man who had learned that advancement came from flattery rather than competence. They called this gathering a strategic planning meeting. The calendar invitation probably used important words like synergy and optimization and forward momentum. But John could see the truth through that glass wall. This was not strategy. This was not planning. This was three men enjoying the comfortable fruits of positions they had not earned, insulated in a bubble of privilege they had built around themselves. John remembered when he had promoted Bradley and Derek years ago. When Titan Peak was still finding its footing, he had seen ambition in their eyes and mistaken it for dedication. He had seen hunger and assumed it was passion for the work itself. He had trusted them to be stewards of something he cared about, never imagining they would transform themselves into kings. The company he had founded on principles of hustle, loyalty, and respect had been hollowed out from the inside. The executives had created a culture in their own image, a world where status was measured by the cost of your watch, where worth was determined by the brand of your suit, where someone in a plain T-shirt and athletic shorts was automatically categorized as beneath notice. They had built exactly the kind of environment John had always despised. 7 minutes had now passed since John had sat down. 7 minutes of being ignored while he watched his company operate under a philosophy that was the complete opposite of everything he believed in. No one had come to check on him. No one had offered him a glass of water. No one had apologized for the delay or provided an update on when someone might be available. He had been categorized as unimportant and promptly forgotten, left to sit in his uncomfortable chair like an inconvenience that would eventually tire itself out and leave. For most of those 7 minutes, John had remained still, watching and processing. He was not a man given to quick anger or impulsive decisions. Life had taught him patience. Struggle had taught him perspective. He had learned long ago that wisdom came from observing carefully before acting, from understanding fully before judging. But patience was not the same as acceptance, and understanding a problem did not mean tolerating it. He had seen enough. He understood enough. He had decided what needed to happen next. John stood up from the uncomfortable waiting chair. The movement was slow and deliberate, carrying none of the hesitation of someone unsure of their position. His old gym bag shifted to his shoulder with practiced ease. His eyes, which had been soft and patient moments before, now held something different. Not anger exactly, but a cold clarity. The look of a man who had made a calculation and was ready to execute it. He did not smooth his T-shirt or adjust his cap. He was not trying to look more impressive for what was about to happen. He was simply preparing to walk into a room and change everything. Without a word to Brittany, the receptionist who had dismissed him, without seeking permission from anyone, John began walking toward the glass-walled conference room. His footsteps were steady on the polished marble floor. Not fast, not aggressive, simply inevitable. And each step brought him closer to the men who had built their comfortable lives on the foundation he had created. The men who had transformed his vision into their personal kingdom. The men who had no idea that the person they had treated like an irrelevant nuisance was about to become the most important figure in their professional lives. The man in the plain shirt and old baseball cap, carrying nothing but a modest gym bag and 6 years of patient observation, was about to remind them who really owned everything they thought was theirs. John did not knock. He simply placed his hand on the heavy oak door of the executive conference room and pushed it wide open. The movement was smooth and unhurried, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had every right to be exactly where he was. The sound of laughter died instantly. Bradley Morrison had been leaning back in his leather chair, mouth open mid-sentence, one hand frozen in an expansive gesture. Now he sat motionless, his expression shifting from amusement to confusion to the first flickers of anger. Derek. Sullivan had snapped his head around at the sound of the door, his eyes going wide. His hand was still wrapped around his crystal whiskey glass, forgotten entirely. Travis Whitman, who had been hovering near the coffee station, startled so violently that he sent a stream of hot coffee spilling across the expensive carpet. He stared at the spreading stain for a moment, then at the intruder, his face a portrait of bewildered panic. Bradley recovered first. His confusion hardened into outrage as he took in the appearance of the man who had just walked uninvited into their private meeting. The plain shirt, the athletic shorts, the baseball cap, the old gym bag. Everything about this person screamed that he did not belong here. He rose from his chair, his face reddening with indignation. "Who the hell let you in here?" Bradley demanded, his voice dropping to a low, tight growl. "This is a private executive session. Security is supposed to vet every outsider." He turned to Travis. "Whitman, who is this man?" Travis could only stammer. I do not know, sir." "I will call security immediately." Derek had risen from his seat as well, studying the intruder with narrowed eyes. Unlike Bradley, he had recognized the face beneath the cap. "What?" Derek said, holding up a hand. "I know who this is." He stepped closer, looking John up and down with undisguised disdain. John Cena, the wrestler. Or should I say, former wrestler. A small, cruel smile played at the corners of his mouth. "If you are here looking for work, Mr. Cena, this is not how it is done. We are not producing anything that would suit someone of your vintage." Bradley's eyebrows rose slightly. He looked at John again, reassessing. Yes, he could see it now. The massive frame was familiar, though dressed down and partially hidden. John Cena. Someone who had been famous once, before the world moved on. But recognition brought no respect. What was a washed-up wrestler doing here, interrupting their meeting? "I suggest you leave now," Bradley said, settling back into his chair. "Whitman, call security and have him escorted out." Through all of this, John had not said a single word. He stood just inside the doorway, perfectly still, his face revealing nothing. He did not defend himself against their insults. He did not argue or explain. Instead, his eyes were fixed on something at the far end of the conference table, the chair at the head of the table. His chair, the one he had designed years ago when Titan Peak Productions was just a dream being built into reality. Without acknowledging the executives or their threats, John began to walk. His footsteps were measured and deliberate, each one landing with a soft, certain sound. He moved past the startled faces of men who could not understand what was happening, heading directly toward that chair. "What do you think you are doing?" Bradley sputtered, rising again. "Whitman, call security now." "Stop right there," Derek commanded, stepping forward to block John's path. "You need to leave immediately before we have you arrested for trespassing." John stopped walking. He was perhaps 10 feet from the head of the table, standing calmly while 3 increasingly agitated executives surrounded him. Slowly, deliberately, he reached up and removed the baseball cap from his head. With the cap gone, his face was fully visible for the first time. The familiar features, the shaved head, the thoughtful eyes, the quiet strength that had nothing to do with physical power. He folded the cap and tucked it into his gym bag. Then he reached into the bag and withdrew a card. It was an identification badge bearing a photograph, a name in clear letters, and a series of codes that meant everything to anyone who understood corporate governance. John placed the card on the polished table and slid it gently toward Bradley Morrison. Bradley looked down at it. His hand reached out and picked it up. The room went completely silent. His eyes scanned the card, the photograph, the name, Cena, the designation, majority shareholder, the ownership percentage, 53%. The color drained from Bradley's face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His hand began to shake. Derek snatched the card from Bradley's trembling fingers. He stared at it, reading the information once, twice, 3 times. Cena, Derek muttered, his voice hollow. The majority shareholder we have only communicated with through email for 6 years. That is you? John did not answer. He did not need to. He simply walked the remaining distance to the head of the table and lowered himself into the chair that had been designed for him. The leather creaked softly as he settled into place, a sound that echoed through the silent room like a gavel falling. He had reclaimed his seat. The 3 executives stood frozen, their faces portraits of dawning horror. Bradley looked like a man watching his world collapse. Derek's arrogance had crumbled into something resembling fear. Travis had forgotten about his phone entirely. Then John spoke. His voice was not loud. He did not shout or rage. He simply spoke in a calm, measured tone that carried more weight than any amount of screaming. 7 minutes, he said. I sat in that hallway for 7 minutes. He let the words settle. I am the co-founder of this company, the majority shareholder controlling 53% of Titan Peak Productions. And because I walked in wearing a T-shirt instead of a designer suit, I was treated like garbage. Told to wait in a hallway like a delivery man hoping for a signature. Bradley finally found his voice, cracked and desperate. Or Mr. Cena, this is a terrible misunderstanding. We had no idea. Please, we can explain everything. No, John said, and though his voice remained soft, the word cut through Bradley's stammering like a blade. There is nothing to explain. He leaned forward slightly, his hands resting flat on the table. This was not a failure of your receptionist. She was following the culture you created. She treated me exactly how she has been trained to treat people who do not look wealthy enough to matter. The young executive who walked past me, he looked right at me and decided I was not worth acknowledging. He learned that attitude from you. John's gaze moved across their faces. You have built a culture in my company where human beings are judged by the price of their clothing, where respect is determined by the brand of watch on someone's wrist, where a person in a plain T-shirt is automatically assumed to be worthless. Derek attempted to regain composure. With all due respect, you have been absent for 6 years. We have managed the operations, grown the revenue. A misunderstanding at reception does not negate years of leadership. John regarded him with an expression that was almost sad. Leadership, he repeated. Sitting in this room drinking whiskey before noon while your employees work. Building a culture where people are afraid to speak up. Creating an environment where the quality of someone's shoes matters more than the quality of their ideas. He shook his head slowly. That is not leadership, Mr. Sullivan. That is entitlement. Bradley made one last attempt, his voice pleading. John, please, we can change protocols, retrain staff. There is no need for anything drastic. John looked at him for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried absolute finality. You had 6 years to maintain the culture of hustle, loyalty, and respect that I built into this company. Instead, you built a kingdom for yourselves and forgot that every person who walks through those doors deserves basic human dignity. His eyes locked onto Bradley's. And that is why you no longer work here. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. You no longer work here. For a moment, no one moved. The executives stood frozen, their minds struggling to process what had just happened. One moment, they had been laughing, drinking whiskey, enjoying their comfortable positions of power. The next, a man in a plain shirt had walked in and dismantled their entire world with 5 simple words. Bradley Morrison was the first to break. "This is insane," he shouted, slamming his palm on the conference table with enough force to rattle the crystal glasses. "You cannot fire us because of a misunderstanding at reception. We have contracts. We have rights. We have lawyers who will tear you apart in court." His face had gone from pale shock back to crimson rage. The fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface. But anger was easier to access. Anger felt like power, even when all power had been stripped away. Derek Sullivan found his voice as well, though it came out higher and tighter than his usual smooth tone. "You have been absent for 6 years. Derek spat, jabbing a finger toward John. 6 years. We are the ones who kept this company running. We managed the operations. We grew the revenue. We maintained the relationships. You cannot just waltz in here and destroy everything because someone asked you to wait a few minutes." Travis Whitman said nothing. He had collapsed into one of the side chairs, his face the color of old paper, his coffee, stained hands trembling in his lap. John listened to their outbursts without expression. He let them rage, let them threaten, let them convince themselves that volume and indignation might somehow reverse what was happening. When they finally ran out of breath, he reached for the old gym bag that had been sitting on his shoulder throughout this entire confrontation. He placed it on the table and opened it with the calm deliberation of a surgeon preparing for an operation. From inside, he withdrew a thin folder with a black cover. Simple, unremarkable, the kind of folder that might contain anything or nothing. But this folder contained everything. John placed it on the polished surface and opened it to the first page. Clause 8.2, he read, his voice clear and measured. Shareholder Agreement, 2018. He paused, letting the date sink in. This was not some improvised accusation. This was a document that had been in place for years, waiting for exactly this moment. The majority shareholder, holding over 50% of company shares, retains the right to immediate termination of any executive officer upon material evidence of gross negligence, ethical violations, or systemic failure to maintain the operational integrity of the company. John looked up from the document, his eyes moving across the 3 men who stood before him in various states of distress. Your collective failure to recognize the individual who controls this company, combined with your decision to treat that individual with contempt based solely on his appearance, constitutes material evidence of a catastrophic failure in judgment at the highest leadership level. Bradley's face contorted. That is not material evidence. That is your bruised ego looking for legal cover. I was not finished, John said quietly, and something in his tone made Bradley's mouth snap shut. John turned to the next page in the folder. In addition to today's events, I have documentation here regarding the transfer of $4.7 million from the film development fund into an account labeled Special Executive Operations. Over the past 18 months, this account has been used for purposes that have nothing to do with company operations. He looked directly at Derek Sullivan. Private jet rentals, luxury resort stays, personal vehicle purchases, all billed to a fund that was supposed to be developing new film projects. Derek's face went gray. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. This, John continued, is evidence of breach of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of company funds. And according to the clause I just read, it gives me the right to terminate your employment immediately. No advance notice required. No board vote necessary. He closed the folder with a sharp snap that echoed through the silent room like a judge's gavel. Bradley Morrison, Derek Sullivan, Travis Whitman, and all executives who report directly to you. Your employment with Titan Peak Productions is terminated, effective immediately. The room seemed to lose all its air. Bradley's rage had deflated into something that looked remarkably like terror. Derek was gripping the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. Travis had not moved at all, John reached into his pocket and withdrew his phone. He pressed a single button. "Michelle," he said calmly, "I need you and your team at the executive boardroom. We have a termination to process." Less than 2 minutes later, the door opened. Michelle Crawford entered first. She was a woman in her early 50s, with silver hair pulled back in a precise bun and eyes that missed nothing. She was John's personal attorney, and she had built a reputation in legal circles for being as efficient as she was ruthless. Behind her came 3 security personnel in dark uniforms. Michelle surveyed the scene with a single glance, taking in the shell, shocked executives, and the calm figure seated at the head of the table. Her expression revealed no surprise. She had been prepared for this possibility. Collect all electronic devices, access cards, and company property, John instructed without looking at the terminated executives. Their security clearances have already been revoked. Their email accounts are locked. Escort them to their vehicles and ensure they take nothing that belongs to Titan Peak Productions. Bradley made one last desperate attempt. "You will regret this, Cena," he shouted as the security personnel moved toward him. "You have no idea how to run this company. Without us, Titan Peak will collapse within a month. We are the ones who know how everything works." John turned to face him. His expression held no anger, no satisfaction, nothing but a cold disappointment that was somehow worse than rage. "This company existed before you," John said quietly. "It will exist long after you are gone. The only difference is that it will no longer be run by people who judge human worth by the price of a watch." Bradley opened his mouth to respond, but the security guards had already taken hold of his arms. Whatever he wanted to say died in his throat as he was guided firmly toward the door. Derek followed without resistance, his earlier bravado completely shattered. Travis had to be helped to his feet, his legs apparently unwilling to support him. They were led out of the boardroom, down the hallway, past the receptionist's desk where this had all begun. Brittany watched them go with wide eyes, understanding flooding her face as she realized the connection between the man she had dismissed and the executives now being escorted from the building. The laughter that had filled this room just 15 minutes ago had been replaced by the heavy shuffle of feet walking toward the end of their careers. John remained standing at the head of the conference table, watching the now empty doorway. The expensive cologne that Bradley favored still lingered in the air. The crystal whiskey glasses still sat where they had been abandoned, amber liquid catching the afternoon light. Michelle was already on her phone, coordinating the systematic lockdown of all accounts and systems associated with the terminated executives. Her voice was calm and professional, handling the destruction of 3 careers with the same efficiency she might use to order lunch. The door opened again, softly this time. John turned, expecting perhaps another security guard with a question. Instead, he saw a man he did not immediately recognize. He was middle-aged, dressed simply in a button-down shirt and khaki pants. No expensive suit, no designer accessories. In his hands, he clutched a tablet computer like a shield. His expression was nervous but determined, the look of someone who had made a difficult decision and was committed to seeing it through. "Mr. Cena?" the man asked, his voice quiet but steady. "I apologize for the intrusion. My name is Nathan Brooks. I am the Director of Technology and Security for Titan Peak Productions." John studied him for a moment. The name was familiar. He remembered it from the quarterly technical reports he had reviewed over the years. Detailed documents about system infrastructure and data security. Nathan Brooks had been with the company for 9 years. He had built most of the digital architecture from scratch. "I need to speak with you," Nathan continued, "before the news spreads, before they have a chance to cover their tracks." John nodded slowly. "I am listening." Nathan stepped further into the room, glancing at Michelle as if unsure whether to continue with her present. John gave a small nod of reassurance. "What you did today, firing Bradley and Derek." Nathan began, his words coming faster now. You made the right decision. But you do not know how right you were. You do not know what they were really planning. He opened his tablet and began scrolling through files. 5 months ago, I discovered some irregularities in our systems. Encrypted files being sent to external servers. Video conferences with participants I did not recognize, held on secured channels that bypassed normal company oversight. Nathan looked up, meeting John's eyes directly. Bradley and Derek were in secret negotiations with Apex Media Corporation. They were planning to sell Titan Peak Productions. John's expression did not change, but his eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Sell the company? Not exactly sell, Nathan said, his voice hardening. Worse. They were planning to strip it. Transfer the most valuable assets, the film library, the screenplay rights, the international distribution contracts, into a new subsidiary controlled by Apex. Everything that makes Titan Peak valuable would be moved out. And the rest? John asked, though he already sensed the answer. The rest would be left to die. The studio facilities, the production equipment, the ongoing projects, and most importantly, Nathan's voice cracked slightly, the employees. More than 900 people work here, Mr. Cena. 900 families who depend on Titan Peak for their livelihoods. Under Bradley's plan, the company would declare bankruptcy within a year. All those people would lose their jobs. He paused, steadying himself. But Bradley and Derek, they had already negotiated their exit packages. Millions of dollars in severance. Senior advisory positions at Apex. They were going to gut the company you built, destroy the lives of everyone who works here, and walk away rich. The room fell silent. John sat motionless, processing what he had just heard. His hand slowly closed into a fist on the table's surface. Why did you not report this through official channels? He asked, his voice calm. But there was an edge beneath it now. Nathan lowered his head. I tried, Mr. Cena. 4 months ago, I submitted a report to Bradley through internal audit. I documented everything I had found. I thought he would want to know. I thought there might be an innocent explanation. He laughed bitterly. A week later, Bradley called me into his office. He looked at me and said, if you continue involving yourself in matters above your pay grade, you will be the first one let go when we restructure. He made it very clear what would happen to my career if I did not drop it. Nathan's voice grew quieter. I have 2 children, Mr. Cena. A mortgage. A wife who works part-time so she can be home when the kids get out of school. I could not afford to lose this job. I could not risk my family's security. He straightened up, meeting John's eyes again. But I also could not watch them destroy everything, so I kept quiet publicly. But privately, I documented everything. Every transaction, every secret meeting, every piece of evidence I could find. I stored it all, encrypted and hidden, waiting for a chance to use it. Waiting for today, John said softly. I did not know today would happen. Nathan admitted. But when I heard the commotion, when I saw them being escorted out, I knew this might be my only opportunity. I had to take it. John rose from his chair and walked slowly around the table toward Nathan. The younger man tensed slightly, uncertain what to expect. John stopped in front of him and placed a hand on his shoulder. You saved this company? John said quietly. Not me. I fired them because they disrespected someone they thought was unimportant. You are the one who discovered they were planning to destroy everything. He paused, letting the words settle. You risked your career, your family's security, to protect 900 people who will never know what you did for them. That is integrity, Nathan. That is the kind of character that those men in their expensive suits will never understand. Nathan blinked rapidly, his eyes suddenly bright with emotion he was struggling to contain. John turned to Michelle, who had been listening to the entire exchange. Add corporate conspiracy and breach of fiduciary duty to the file, he instructed. I want a complete audit of every transaction connected to Bradley and Derek. Everything they touched for the past 3 years. He looked back at Nathan. And effective immediately, Nathan Brooks is the acting chief technology officer of Titan Peak Productions. Nathan stared at him, stunned into silence. I do not know what to say, Mr. Cena. Do not say anything, John replied. Go secure our systems. Make sure Bradley and Derek cannot access anything remotely. Cannot delete anything. Cannot sabotage anything on their way out. He placed his hand on Nathan's shoulder once more. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and I am going to need people I can trust. Nathan nodded, a new resolve settling over his features. He turned and headed for the door with purpose in his stride that had not been there when he entered. John watched him go, then turned to look out the window at the Los Angeles skyline. Somewhere out there, Bradley Morrison and Derek Sullivan were being driven away from the building they had treated as their personal kingdom. They had walked in this morning believing they were untouchable. They were leaving with nothing. But this was not over. The executives had been removed, but the damage they had done to the company's culture ran deeper than any single termination could fix. The employees who had learned to judge people by their clothing. The systems that rewarded arrogance over integrity. The atmosphere of entitlement that had infected every level of the organization. All of it needed to change. And the 900 people who worked at Titan Peak Productions. The people who Bradley and Derek had been willing to sacrifice for their own enrichment. They deserved to know the truth. They deserved to know that their jobs were safe. They deserved to understand what kind of company Titan Peak was going to become. John turned away from the window. Michelle, he said, I need to address the employees, all of them, as soon as possible. The news spread like wildfire. Within an hour of Bradley Morrison and Derek Sullivan being escorted from the building, headlines were everywhere. John Cena fires entire executive team after being treated like a homeless person at his own company. Meridian Studios shares fluctuated wildly as investors scrambled to understand what was happening. Inside the building, the atmosphere was even more turbulent. Employees gathered in anxious clusters, whispering, checking phones, wondering if they should start updating their resumes. No one knew what came next. The uncertainty was suffocating. John understood this. The stock market would eventually stabilize, but the 900 people who worked at Titan Peak Productions could not wait. They needed answers now. I need to speak to everyone, he told Michelle, all employees, right now. I will be in the main atrium in 5 minutes. He took the stairs rather than the elevator, descending through the building he had helped create. The main atrium was an impressive space at the heart of Titan Peak Productions, a soaring open area where all 12 floors connected through balconies and walkways. Natural light poured in through a massive skylight above. By the time John reached the ground floor, hundreds of employees had gathered. They lined the balconies. They crowded the ground level. They pressed against railings, craning their necks to see. John walked to the center of the atrium. He did not climb onto a stage or stand behind a podium. He simply stopped in the middle of the open floor, surrounded by the people he was about to address. His plain T-shirt, his athletic shorts, his comfortable running shoes. He looked like anyone who might have wandered in off the street. The murmuring faded as employees realized he was about to speak. Hundreds of eyes fixed on him. The silence was raw and anxious. John did not use a microphone. His voice carried naturally through the open space. You have heard the news, he began simply. You have seen the headlines. You are scared. I understand. He paused, making eye contact with as many faces as possible. Bradley Morrison, Derek Sullivan, and every executive who reported directly to them are no longer employed by this company. They were terminated today, effective immediately. A ripple of whispers. John waited for it to subside. They were not fired because they failed to recognize me. They were fired because of how they treated someone they believed was unimportant. Someone they decided was not worth basic human courtesy. He took a breath. This morning, I walked into this building wearing the same clothes I wear every day. No suit. No expensive watch. Because of how I was dressed, I was told to wait in the hallway like a delivery person. When I entered the boardroom, I was insulted and told to leave. John's expression grew thoughtful, almost vulnerable. Some of you might wonder why I dress this way. Why someone in my position does not wear designer suits and expensive accessories. Let me explain. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I have not always been successful. There were years when I had nothing. Years when I drove a limousine during the day and slept in my car at night because I could not afford an apartment. Years when I woke up at 5 in the morning to work out at a gym before my shift because that was the only time I had. Years when I wondered if anyone would ever give me a chance. His voice softened. And then, even after success came, life reminded me that material things mean nothing. I have experienced loss that money could never fix. I have sat alone in empty houses that were full of expensive things, but completely devoid of what actually matters. The atrium had gone completely silent. Every person seemed to lean in closer. I choose to dress simply not because I cannot afford better. I choose it because I never want to forget what it feels like to have nothing. I never want to become someone who looks at a person in worn clothes and assumes they are worthless. Because I was that person once, and the people who showed me kindness during those years. They did not care what I was wearing. They saw me as a human being. He let those words settle before continuing. What happened to me this morning was not about my wounded pride. It was a symptom of a culture that has been allowed to grow inside this company. A culture where people are judged by the price of their clothing, where respect is given based on job titles and designer labels, where anyone who does not look wealthy enough is automatically dismissed. John swept his gaze across the assembled employees. I built Titan Peak Productions on different principles: hustle, loyalty, respect. I believed that great ideas could come from anyone, that every person deserved dignity regardless of their position or appearance. While I was absent, those values were lost, replaced by arrogance and a toxic hierarchy that measured human worth by the brand of watch on your wrist. His voice grew warmer. I want to tell you a story. Years ago, when I was just starting out in wrestling, there was a janitor at an arena where I was training. His name was Frank. Every night after everyone left, Frank stayed behind to clean. Nobody noticed him. He was invisible. Employees leaned forward, drawn into the narrative. One night, I stayed late to practice. Frank came in to clean. We started talking. He told me he used to be a mechanic until an accident and medical bills took everything. The janitorial job was how he supported his daughter who was trying to get through college. John smiled at the memory. That night, Frank mentioned something about how the ring ropes were wearing unevenly and how repositioning certain equipment could prevent injuries. I mentioned it to my trainer the next day. Frank's suggestion probably saved several wrestlers from getting hurt. One simple observation from a man everyone had decided was nobody important. He looked out at the crowd with quiet intensity. Great ideas do not come from expensive boardroom chairs. The most valuable contributions often come from people others overlook. The grip who notices a safety hazard. The assistant who suggests a better schedule. The security guard who treats every visitor with respect because he understands you never know who might walk through that door. John's voice rose slightly. Every person in this building deserves to be treated with dignity. Not because of what they might do for you. Not because they might turn out to be important, but because they are human beings, and that alone makes them worthy of respect. He paused before his expression hardened. But I have not told you the worst part. The disrespect I experienced was not the only reason those executives were fired. The crowd tensed. Bradley Morrison and Derek Sullivan were secretly negotiating to sell off Titan Peak Productions. Not to help it grow, to strip it. They planned to transfer our most valuable assets to an outside corporation, pocket millions in personal payoffs, and leave the company to collapse. Guy Esps echoed through the atrium. Under their plan, Titan Peak would have declared bankruptcy within a year. More than 900 jobs eliminated. 900 families without income. Also, 2 men could get richer. John raised his hand as angry murmurs swelled. That plan has been stopped. Your jobs are safe. Titan Peak Productions is not being sold, not being stripped, not being destroyed. A wave of relief swept through the crowd. Some employees embraced. Others simply closed their eyes, releasing hours of tension. But survival is not enough. John continued. I want to rebuild this company on the values it was supposed to represent. He straightened. Starting today, there will be no rigid dress code at Titan Peak Productions. You will be evaluated on your ideas, your dedication, your integrity, and the way you treat your colleagues, especially those others might overlook. John gestured toward Nathan Brooks, standing at the edge of the crowd. Nathan Brooks discovered the conspiracy that threatened to destroy this company. He risked his career and his family's security to document what was happening, even when threatened. Starting today, Nathan is the acting chief technology officer of Titan Peak Productions. Applause erupted, genuine and spontaneous. This is how we will operate now. Integrity will be rewarded, courage recognized, and every person who walks through our doors will be treated with respect, whether they arrive in a limousine or on a bus. Whether they wear a designer suit or a teat shirt that has seen better days. John took one more look around the atrium. I am not just coming back to save Titan Peak Productions. I am coming back to rebuild the culture I should never have let slip away. The silence lasted 2 seconds. Then the atrium exploded with applause. It was not polite corporate clapping. This was raw and real. The sound of hundreds of people releasing fear and replacing it with hope. Some cheered, others wiped away tears. John did not retreat to an executive floor. He stepped into the crowd, shaking hands, listening to anyone who wanted to speak. A young woman from the design department approached him, her eyes red. Mr. Cena, she said quietly, I just wanted to thank you. Last year, I was passed over for a promotion because one of the executives said I did not present professionally enough. I could not afford the clothes they expected. I have felt invisible here ever since. An older man from facilities management stepped forward. Same thing happened to me, he said. I have worked here for 15 years, but because I wear a maintenance uniform, some executives would not even look at me in the elevator. Like I was not there. A security guard nodded. I have seen it every day. People treated differently based on what they are wearing. The expensive suits get smiles and handshakes. The rest of us get ignored. John listened to each of them, his expression growing more determined with every story. That ends today, he said firmly. I promise you, that ends today. He continued moving through the crowd, hearing story after story of employees who had been dismissed, overlooked, or made to feel worthless because they did not fit the image of success that Bradley and Derek had cultivated. The sun was beginning to set outside the massive windows, painting the Los Angeles skyline gold and orange. Inside, the atmosphere had transformed completely from morning terror to something like hope. But John knew this was only the beginning. The toxic executives had been removed. The employees had been reassured. But there was still unfinished business. Bradley and Derek were out there, probably consulting lawyers, looking for ways to protect themselves. And there was still the question of what came next for them. Punishment, legal action, or something else entirely. John excused himself from the crowd with quiet promises to continue these conversations. He made his way back toward the conference room where Michelle waited with updates. The celebration continued behind him, but his mind was already moving forward. thinking about justice and mercy, about consequences and second chances, about what kind of leader he truly wanted to be. 3 days had passed since the terminations. 3 days of media frenzy, stock market fluctuations, and endless speculation about the future of Titan Peak Productions. 3 days for the dust to begin settling, and for the full scope of what had happened to become clear. Michelle Crawford walked into John's office carrying a thick folder. She placed it on his desk with the quiet precision of someone delivering a verdict. "We have completed the investigation," she said. "It is worse than we initially thought." John looked up from the window, where he had been watching the Los Angeles skyline. Bradley and Derek signed a preliminary agreement with Apex Media Corporation 2 months ago. Michelle continued. "They violated their fiduciary duties, deceived shareholders, and deliberately concealed material financial information. With the evidence we have, we can pursue civil litigation. They would be liable for damages between 8 and 12 million." She paused. "Additionally, if we forward this file to federal authorities, they could face criminal charges for securities fraud. We are talking potential prison time." John picked up the folder and leafed through the pages slowly. Bank statements, email transcripts, meeting minutes from secret negotiations, the paper trail of betrayal documented in meticulous detail. He set the folder down and turned back to the window. "Michelle," he said after a long moment, "I want to propose a different approach." She raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "Invite Bradley and Derek to a meeting. No lawyers on their side. Just them, you and me. I want to speak with them directly." Michelle hesitated. "Are you certain?" "They could refuse, or this could be used against us later if things go to court." "I am certain." 2 days later, Bradley Morrison and Derek Sullivan walked into the Titan Peak Productions conference room for the second time in a week. But everything had changed. Gone were the expensive suits and the air of entitled confidence. Bradley wore a simple blazer that looked like it had been pulled hastily from the back of a closet. Derek's tie was slightly crooked, and dark circles under his eyes suggested he had not slept well in days. They looked like men who had spent every waking hour imagining the worst possible outcomes. Because that was exactly what they had been doing. John sat at the head of the table, in the same chair where he had delivered their termination. He wore the same plain T-shirt, the same simple clothes. He did not stand when they entered. "Sit down," he said. They sat. Bradley tried to maintain a stoic expression, but his hands trembled slightly as he placed them on the table. Derek could not bring himself to make eye contact. "I will be direct," John began. "My lawyer has informed you of what we are legally entitled to pursue. Civil litigation for 8 to 12 million in damages. Criminal referral to the FBI for securities fraud. Your careers would be finished permanently. You might spend years in prison." Bradley swallowed hard. Derek stared at the table surface, as if hoping it might open up and swallow him. "But I do not want to do that." Both men looked up, startled, confusion mixed with desperate hope in their eyes. "Not because I forgive you," John continued, his voice calm but firm. "You betrayed my trust. You conspired to destroy the livelihoods of 900 people. You built a toxic culture that judged human beings by the price of their clothing. I do not forgive any of that." He let the words sink in before continuing. "But I have learned something over the years. Punishment is not always the best answer. Sometimes, creating an opportunity for people to make things right does more good than making them suffer." John placed a document on the table and slid it toward them. "This is a settlement agreement. If you sign it, we will not pursue civil litigation, and we will not forward anything to federal authorities. In exchange, you agree to 3 conditions." Bradley stared at the document like it might bite him. "First," John said, "you will issue a public apology. Not to me, to the employees of Titan Peak Productions, the people whose lives you were willing to destroy for your own enrichment." He held up a second finger. "Second, you will donate 2.5 million to the Los Angeles Food Bank. This money will come from the bonuses you have received over the past several years. It will feed tens of thousands of people who are struggling. People whose society often overlooks. People like the ones you looked right through when you decided they were not worth your attention. Bradley's face had gone pale. Derek looked like he might be sick. Third, John continued, you will each complete 200 hours of volunteer service at homeless shelters and food kitchens throughout the city. Not for publicity, not for photo opportunities. You will serve meals, clean tables, and look into the eyes of people you would have walked past without a second glance. You will do this because you need to understand something that your expensive educations and corner offices never taught you. He leaned forward slightly. Every human being has value. Every person deserves dignity. It does not matter what they are wearing or what they can do for you. That is the lesson you failed to learn, and this is your chance to learn it. The room fell silent. Bradley finally spoke, his voice hoarse. And if we refuse? Michelle answered before John could. Then we proceed with full legal action. And I promise you, with the evidence we have, you will lose far more than 2.5 million. You will lose everything. Derek looked at Bradley. Bradley looked at the document. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Bradley picked up the pen and signed his name. Derek signed immediately after. John stood. You can go. The two men rose, moving toward the door like sleepwalkers. Bradley paused at the threshold, turning back as if he wanted to say something. But no words came. He simply nodded once, a gesture that might have been gratitude or shame or both, and then they were gone. When the door closed, Michelle turned to John. Are you sure about this? They deserved worse. John smiled slightly, the gentle expression that those who knew him recognized as rare and genuine. Maybe, but 2.5 million will feed tens of thousands of hungry people for a year. 200 hours at a food kitchen might actually change how they see the world. And a public apology will remind everyone that arrogance always comes with a price. He looked out the window, at the city stretching toward the horizon. Punishment would only hurt them. This might actually help them change, and it will definitely help the people who need it most. In the weeks that followed, John did not disappear back into the shadows as he had done 6 years before. He stayed, not as a distant investor monitoring quarterly reports, but as an active leader walking the halls of the company he had built. He established the Open Door program, an initiative designed to give opportunities to people who had been overlooked by traditional hiring practices. Former inmates who had served their time and were looking for a second chance. Homeless individuals working to rebuild their lives. Young people from underserved neighborhoods who had never had access to the entertainment industry. They were trained, mentored, and given the chance to prove themselves based on their abilities rather than their backgrounds. He changed the hiring process entirely. No photographs required on applications. First, round interviews conducted blind, where recruiters could only hear candidates' voices and evaluate their ideas without seeing their faces or their clothes. Merit became the only measure that mattered. Once a month, John spent an entire day working alongside different departments. 1 month, he sat with the security team, learning their routines and hearing their concerns. Another month, he helped the facility's crew reorganize storage rooms. He ate lunch in the cafeteria with entry-level employees, asked questions, and genuinely listened to the answers. He wanted to understand Titan Peak Productions from the ground up, not from the sanitized perspective of executive summaries. Nathan Brooks was officially promoted to Chief Technology Officer. The word, acting, finally removed from his title. He became a symbol of what Titan Peak Productions now valued. Integrity and courage, recognized and rewarded regardless of previous position. 6 months after the events of that extraordinary day, Titan Peak Productions announced its newest project. It was a documentary film about social inequality and the prejudices people face based on their appearance. The film would explore how society makes snap judgments about worth and value based on clothing, addresses, and other superficial markers. It would tell the stories of people who had been overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated simply because they did not fit the image of success. John was not just the executive producer. He had agreed to appear in the film, playing a small role as a homeless man that others walk past without seeing. The premiere was held at a historic Los Angeles theater. The guest list was unlike any Hollywood event. Alongside industry executives in designer suits were volunteers from the Open Door program, shelter workers, and formerly homeless individuals who had found their way to stability. They sat side by side, equals in the audience, distinguished only by their shared humanity. After the screening, during the press reception, a journalist approached John with a question that had been circulating since the story first broke. "Mr. Cena, do you have any regrets about firing your entire executive team just because they made you wait a few minutes?" John considered the question carefully before responding. "I did not fire them because they failed to recognize me," he said. "I fired them because of how they treated someone they thought did not matter, someone they assumed had nothing to offer them, someone they decided was not worth basic human courtesy based solely on appearance." He paused, choosing his next words with care. That is the true measure of a person's character. Not how they treat people with power. Not how they behave when they think someone important is watching. But how they treat the people they believe are beneath them. The ones they think they will never need. The ones they assume do not count. John looked out at the crowd, where guests in expensive suits mingled with people in modest clothing, all sharing the same space, the same conversation, the same moment. Real power is not about titles or appearances. Real power is using whatever position you have to lift others up, especially the people that society tends to forget. In a quiet corner of the reception hall, a man stood alone, watching the proceedings with an expression that was difficult to read. Bradley Morrison had completed his 200 hours of volunteer service 3 weeks earlier. He had served thousands of meals. He had cleaned countless tables. He had looked into the eyes of people he once would have dismissed without a thought, and something inside him had shifted in ways he was still trying to understand. He had not come to the premiere seeking attention or redemption. He had come because he needed to see what John had built, what Titan Peak Productions had become, what he himself had almost destroyed. When John finished speaking, Bradley joined the applause. It was soft, almost tentative, the applause of a man who understood that he was witnessing something meaningful, something he had nearly prevented from ever existing. No one recognized him, no one approached him, and perhaps that was exactly as it should be. And so, this is how John Cena reclaimed his company. Not through blind rage or vindictive punishment, but through principle and dignity. He transformed a moment of humiliation into an opportunity to redefine what corporate culture could be. He proved that leadership is not about commanding from above, but about standing alongside the people you serve. This story reminds us of a simple but profound truth. You can judge a company, an organization, or a person not by how they treat the powerful, but by how they treat those they believe to be unimportant. The receptionist, the security guard, the person in the worn T-shirt. These interactions reveal character in ways that boardroom presentations never can. Because true respect never comes with conditions. It is not reserved for those who can offer something in return. It is extended freely to everyone as a recognition of their fundamental humanity. And arrogance, no matter how well dressed, no matter how expensively adorned, always eventually pays its price. What do you think of John's decision? Was the settlement the right choice, or did Bradley and Derek deserve harsher consequences? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, If it made you think about how we treat the people around us, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected places. And sometimes the person everyone overlooks turns out to be the one who changes everything. Thank you for following this story! Let us know in the comments below. If this story has moved you, and you'd like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter we're preparing for you.